Let's answer your questions all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TVs. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Welcome in, welcome all. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So today we are going to do, as we talked about yesterday, a mailbag. Got a lot of questions. Don't have time to go through every single question we got, which I'm very appreciative for. That's a good problem to have, but we'll get through as many as we can on today's show. And then we'll probably have another mailbag in September. And then we'll have plenty. We'll have multiple throughout the winter and throughout the offseason. So plenty of opportunities going forward to still get your questions answered if we don't get to yours on this episode. But the Tigers have an off day on Monday, yesterday, as you're listening to this. So now I feel like it's a good time to kind of regroup. We've had the last 3 Mondays off in a row, so we've got to talk about some big picture stuff. And today you all kind of get to drive the show. So let's start off by talking about the rest of the season. We had 2 questions that kind of were similar in that conversation. One is from Dobby, who is with a relatively weak schedule, with a relatively weak stretch on the horizon. What's your prediction for the Tigers record by the end of the season? And then we have Caden, who says, tomorrow for mailbag, can we talk about how easy the rest of the Tigers schedule is? Lists off the teams we plays. I'm trying not to think about getting into the race by that KC series in mid-September. So yeah, the rest of the way is Cubs, White Sox, Angels, Red Sox, Padres, A's, Rockies, then Orioles and Royals back-to-back mid-September, then Orioles again, then Tampa, and then we end the season with Chicago. So those last 2 weeks are pretty difficult, but from now until then, the next probably 3 weeks, I guess you would say, are some pretty not great teams. Obviously, you have the Red Sox who are fighting for a playoff spot. You have the Padres who are pretty solid. But outside of that, before that Baltimore series, you kind of have a lot of the bottom feeders in the league. I would love to see this team finish the season over 500. That would be awesome, considering everything that has happened to the Tigers this year, from the injury side of things, Torkelson getting demoted, Parker Meadows getting demoted at the beginning of the season. Like, so much didn't go right this year that if they were still able to manage a win total that starts with the number 8, I think that would be a fantastic sign, I guess, going forward, and just a successful year. Like, I have a difficult time saying anything besides like the playoffs, or if they do, assuming they still finish under 500, that's like successful. That feels weird to say, too competitive for my own good. But like, I again, from where this team was in June, when nothing was going right, the offense was absolutely dreadful, and the injuries started, like it was bleak. I mean, we were coming on here and talking about how the train could really fall off the tracks again after the trade deadline. Similar conversation, and here they are, 3 games under 500, and the rest of the way are going to throw out one of, if not just straight up, the youngest lineup in the game of baseball. So, I mean, exact prediction, I don't know. Like, young teams are very inconsistent. I would imagine that they'll probably win some games they shouldn't, and they'll probably lose some games that they should. And if they can go over 500 the rest of the way, that puts them in a position to finish around 500 on the season. And I would be pretty pleased with that, given, again, where we were at one point in the middle of the season. Next question is going to come from Paul, who says, what is up with the number of bullpen games? No other starters on the farm worth promoting. It is audition season. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I think that it's a fair point to still bring up. It's interesting because currently on the 40-man roster, there really isn't a ton of players that aren't up right now already that you want to audition. I mean, I think in a perfect world, the Tigers would have loved to have, thrown a bone to Ty Madden or something like that for the remainder of the season, but he has struggled mightily in AAA this year, and so that's not going to happen. And also in the same breath, they are bullpen games, but we've talked about it a few times. Like they are still the guys who are going bulk are going 5 to 6 innings, which is starter production. So it's unconventional, it's non-traditional. You're starting off with a reliever, you have an opener, but you're also still getting those 5 to 6 innings that you need. So I don't. You're in a weird place with the rotation, like genuinely, like that. That's the best that I can really like. It's weird. I don't think that like Brian Sammons is going to be in the rotation next year. I would say that he's probably not even going to be in the bullpen to start off the season next season. We'll see what happens with him this winter. I don't even know how many, if he has options or anything. I'd have to look into his contract, but like you're kind of just piecing it together and getting solid production. Kenta Maeda has been good out of the pen, much better than he was as a starter. It's weird. It's really weird, and again, non-conventional. But if they continue getting innings from Herder and Sammons and Maeda, then they can kind of limp to the finish line here with what they have. Now, if they start not getting innings from those three guys, then they're in a heap of trouble. But I mean, they'll call up some pitcher for September. It's going to be Malloy and then a pitcher almost assuredly for September call-ups. Your guess is as good as mine. Like genuinely, I've been clamoring kind of like I would like to see Leah Lockhart at the major league level, but like they don't have a ton of options on the 40-man. They'd have to make a move to open up a spot. So we'll see. But I think as it stands right now, they're pretty content with what they've been getting out of the bullpen. Let's go to Peyton Montgomery, who says, 1, do you think the Tigers will go after Bregman for third base? And 2, from what you have seen, is Montero going to be an option in the rotation next year? We'll start with 1. Man, your guess is as good as mine. What if Jace Jung rakes the rest of the way and plays really good defense? It's a 6-week sample, and he'd be, he's a rookie. Are you going to not go after Bregman because you want to see a full season of Jace Jung? And then what if he struggles next year? Then you go, okay, well, then the same complaints that happened last year are going to happen again. Do you move Jace back to his natural position, which is second base? Then you have to find a spot for Colt Keith. You move Colt Keith to what? He's not going to play third base. He doesn't have the arm for it. You're going to move him to first. And you have the Torkelson conversation. Then you have the Malloy conversation, right? Like there's so many moving parts with that. I think that there is something to be said for just going out and getting a proven talent. And I think that that's something that this team needs to do this winter. I think that they absolutely need to get a proven major league hitter that can be a middle of the lineup bat for this team. And Bregman would certainly be that. Obviously has ties with AJ Hinch. There's a lot of things pointing to that would be intriguing. This is just the age-old question of how much is Chris Ilitch willing to invest in this baseball team? And that's something that I don't know the answer to, that you don't know the answer to, and that we will not see until the winter. If I had to put my money on it right now, I would say no. I would say that the Tigers aren't walking away from the winter with Alex Bregman. But I think that when we get to the offseason, we're going to be having conversations about what does the team next year look like. And one of the biggest question marks surrounding what does the team look like in 2025 is what does third base look like? Does anybody want Matt Vierling to start every single day at third base anymore? I'm good, right? Like I think he's better as a utility guy that can play all the positions, not be an everydayer at third base. Jace Jung, again, we'll see what happens the next 6 weeks, but even if he rakes, that's still a pretty small sample size for a young player that struggled defensively in the minors. I think that there's a very real argument that you should go out and try to bring in a third base. This free agent class is much better than the last 2 years as well. We'll talk about that again as we get a lot closer to the winter. So good question there. I think Bregman's going to be a very hot topic of conversation on this show come winter. We will have plenty of conversations surrounding Alex Bregman and really again just like third base as a whole when we get to the winter, because I think there's a lot of different angles there. Let's talk about Kiter Montero. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, plenty over the years. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to perform and watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon and out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow recapping Game 1 against the Cubbies, the Northsiders, and talking about anything else surrounding the Tigers organization. After you make us your first listen, make Locked On MLB with Sully your second listen. He's here to provide daily national expertise with his trademark humor and get you ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every day on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So answering your questions, we are doing a mailbag show. Part 2 from this question from Peyton was, from what you have seen from Montero, is he going to be an option in the rotation next year? I would say if the season started tomorrow, if the 2025 season started tomorrow and everyone was fully healthy, no, that he would not crack the rotation on opening day. But I do think that he is playing for role within the organization. I think that he is certainly playing and pitching for to be maybe that first call-up guy. Maybe there's a conversation about making him some sort of a long reliever. We'll see. But I think that also you saw this year how quickly starting pitching depth can evaporate, right? Like he's not going to make the opening day rotation next year. Is he going to pitch maybe even 100 innings next year? It's on the table, right? Like we're seeing that with him, literally him this year, right? He was nowhere near anybody's radar for starting rotation and starting pitching this season. And then we looked around and had one healthy starting pitcher at the major league level in the middle of the season. So there you go. So I said a similar thing with Manning going into the year, and then Manning himself got hurt, and that kind of threw a wrench in that. But it's like yes, he has been really good. Yes, I think that his ceiling is an everyday starter, but I doubt that they're going to go into next season with him. But I also said the same thing about Reese Olson in August of last year, and he was amazing the last month and a half of last season, amazing in spring training, and earned a roster spot, and everybody loves Reese Olson now. So I'm not putting anything off the table. I just think if the season started tomorrow, which is funny to say given that there's still a month and a half left in this season, but if 2025 started tomorrow with everybody at full health, I would say no. And then free agency, I would imagine they'll go out and try to get a starter there as well. But starting pitching depth, not a bad thing. And he will pitch at the major league level, barring health next year. I can promise you that. From David, we have love the youth movement. Who is the first name you look at in the box score? For me, it's Colt Keith. I love all these guys, but I'm looking at Colt first. What about you? That's a great question. I think I probably, man. I obviously watch 162 of these. So I don't know. When I look at a box score, it's for a refresher. It's not to learn anything new. I would say that the person, I would say it's probably Colt Keith and Parker Meadows. I would say those are probably the two. Now, Jace Jung's call up makes me really excited every time he steps in there and whatnot. But Riley Green's past, what could he become status, and is just kind of this dude's really good. So I think it's probably Colt Keith and Parker Meadows. But like again, you look at the lineup Sunday. I mean, like 7 or 8 of those guys. I'm pretty excited about when they get in the batter's box. Dylan Dingler when he plays as well is up there for me. From Rick, we have, do you think there is any way the Tigers could extend Skubal with a fat contract, or will Boris insist on free agency? I think that's a pretty big conversation for this winter. Look, we know Boris's history. We know what Boris clients usually are about, and that is not very often extending contracts when they have years of control left. I think they're in a weird position too, because it's a pitcher with a pretty, like, unfortunately lengthy injury history. Like, had Tommy John when he was in college, blew out his arm 2 years ago. Like, this is hopefully his first full season, knock on wood. So like, it's one of those things where how much money are you willing to invest in somebody who has an injury history, but also is the best pitcher in baseball? There's some pros and cons there from the front office's perspective. I think the Tigers would be silly not to try and extend him. I absolutely think they should, even given all of those factors. But I do think that Boris is a guy that is just so set on, we want to test the market. We want to go to free agency and see how high we can get this price tag. And especially if Skubal is healthy from now until he is a free agent, he's just going to keep wanting to press that button. But in the same breath, Boris also knows Skubal's injury history, right? And maybe is risk rewarding that as well. So I think I'll put it this way. I would expect him to test free agency. I'm not putting it as an impossibility for him to get extended, but if he was to get extended, it would have to be a pretty hefty price. Like, it's already going to be a hefty price tag. I mean, for him, it would have to be a high number for Skubal and Boris to be like, oh yeah, we won't test free agency anymore. Especially assuming he brings home Cy Young this season. So I would lean towards no. I would lean toward he's going to at least test free agency. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't test free agency and the Tigers are the highest bidder and he stays. But if I had to guess right now, I would say he's probably going to free agency when he's eligible, which is not like this year. We have time, but I would imagine that that's still very much on the table. From Anthony, we have, where do you believe the Tigers will add this winter if the call-ups of Trey Sweeney and Jace Jung are at least league average hitters by the end of the season? This is a great question. It kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier with third base, right? Like, that does throw not a wrench, because it's a good problem to have, but like, if Sweeney and Young are fantastic the rest of the way, then are you going to be as aggressive going after a third baseman? If, how confident are you in Colt Keith at second base going forward? Again, first base, huge question mark. Outfield, when healthy, kind of set, which is exciting. Parker Meadows, Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter, Matt Bierling, those 4 can kind of man your outfield going forward. Now, if you want Bierling to play, again, a little bit more of like super utility, maybe you can get another 4th outfielder in there. They clearly have no issue with that. But I think that the areas that they are going to address, they're never going to shy away from signing starting pitching. This front office has made that clear since Harris took over, and I think that I agree with that sentiment. We saw this year, we've seen like every year for the last 5 years how quickly starting pitching depth can evaporate. And like every year people go, oh, we have too many starting pitchers, like whatever, like, are we going to trade people and whatnot? We even talked about the potential for trading Matt Manning last winter, right? And then we have one starting pitcher healthy by July. And it's like, okay, well, that's why you go out and you sign a ton of starters. So I think that they'll go after a starter. They need to. And this is one of my big things this winter. And again, we'll talk about all of this a lot more when we get to the offseason. They need to get a high leverage swing and miss reliever. They need one. Like air, they need one. Go out, get a high leverage, really good shutdown reliever that can get strikeouts and swings and misses in high leverage. Because they do not have that right now. So that's one of their biggest team needs. But I would imagine that this question, like most, are focused on the offensive side of the ball. You have a lot of could go either ways, right? First base, we've already talked about a lot. Again, I just mentioned second base, third base, shortstop. Does anybody want Javi Baez to be the everyday shortstop next year? I think you're hoping Trey Sweeney hits a little bit just to justify, kind of maybe having a platoon next season. Catcher, you're probably set on, but they might go a little bit of depth there. And then again, outfield, I think you're fine on, unless you really want to get like another like power hitting fourth outfielder. But I would say that those positions are ones that we're going to have conversations with come the winter. But some of that has to be decided by what we see in the last 6 weeks of the season here as well. Okay, let's keep the ball rolling. Got a few more questions to go over. We will go through those right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, on Prize Picks it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on all the daily action with your friends and become a part of the Prize Picks community today, where you can 100 times your money. You can turn $10 into $1,000. You can also sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Again, more or less on player stats, especially with football right around the corner. It's really easy. It's really fun. Get in on all the action with Prize Picks today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. Going through all of your questions here. From Patrick, we have, if Torque continues to struggle from his recent call-up, should the Tigers look to get a first baseman this offseason? Absolutely. Yes, without a doubt in my mind. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, and just like how he does the rest of the year will kind of determine how aggressive the Tigers are going to be in their pursuit of a first baseman. So that'll be something to keep an eye out for. But yes, 100%, especially if he struggles, they need to go after a first baseman, or Malloy in September looks like a great first baseman. From the Johnson family farm, we have Scott. Do you believe Jackson Joe will be in the big league starting rotation next year on opening day? And do you think Scott Harris will sign JV as a farewell for him? The JV thing's been asked every year for 6 years, 7 years. I've always leaned no. But I do think that there's a conversation for that. Look, Verlander would only come back to the Tigers if he felt like they could compete and potentially win a World Series. He's in his early 40s. Like, he's not just going to go to the Tigers just because it's like a feel-good story and be on a team that's going to lose 90 plus games. Now, they're not. They're on pace to do way better than that, be around 500. They've done that last year as well. But I think that the Tigers need to prove tangible evidence that they are over the hump and are going to compete for at least a playoff spot, if not a ring, for Verlander to justify that at this point in his career. So again, I would lean no. If he pitches till he's 45, like he says he wants to, 46, like he says he wants to, maybe the Tigers can be, a really high-end competitive team by then. But for this upcoming season, I would lean no. And then the Job thing, I fully expect Job to pitch in the major leagues next season. I don't expect it on opening day. That being said, that's going to be one of the most talked about things going into spring training this upcoming season. And I think if the Tigers are competitive and the starting pitching gets thin in May, June, July next year, then Jackson Job's going to get the call. I really wish it was this year, but it's not going to happen. From Charles, we have any chance the Tigers trade Baez this offseason in an attempt to free up more resources to spend on, say, Pete Alonso as a right-handed power bat? Trade idea, Baez and Torkelson to the Dodgers. Dodgers get Torque for eating Baez's salary. Scott Harris gets a younger McKinstry and Austin Guthier to replace him, who walks more than he strikes out. So really, my biggest thing is just nobody wants to trade for Javi Baez. And tagging on another player in theory could make that happen. But Torkelson has zero trade value right now too. As it stands right now, what you are trading away, and if you were to trade Torkelson in theory, which I don't think they're going to do because he doesn't have any trade value, is a guy like people just want to look at it and be like, oh, look, like you're just going to be able to dangle this guy in front of other teams because he's a former number one overall prospect or a number one overall pick rather. And they're all going to be like, oh my goodness, yes. Like, let me get a former number one overall pick. Like front offices watch games and are aware of his current situation. This is a dude that has hit for the second half of last season is the only time he has hit at the major league level. And he got demoted this year after a full season in the majors last year and has played really, really bad defense at first base on top of all of that. So, like, there just isn't a lot of value in the player. I'm not saying he's just going to be awful. I'm not saying there is not still room for him to improve. I'm not saying that, you know, he can't become a pretty darn good baseball player someday, right? I'm just saying that is his track record right now, today. That has no trade value. So I don't think that being able to attach torque onto a Baez trade is going to make Baez tradable, and I do not think Baez is tradable. I think the only way that Baez is removed from this team is if he's cut and bought out, and that is something that we will discuss this winter for sure. But that's a question I get a lot. So again, like good question. These are all good questions. Both of those, honestly, the Torkelson trade thing and the Baez trade thing are both questions I get a lot. So I'm glad I was able to kind of address both in one foul swoop there. Let's talk about the lineup that we saw on Sunday. This is from Tyler. Do you think the lineup last night was a preview of 2025? I do think they need to find a good veteran right-handed bat to plug between Green and Carp. If Torque does not perform down the stretch, they pull the plug, put Torque in a trade, find a first baseman. Also, with the performances of Herder and Salmons, I believe Wentz is out of the 2025 roster. Said that the odds of Wentz on the 2025 roster are getting smaller. I do think that a righty kind of power bat. That's why I kind of leave like a corner outfielder on the table if they really want to in free agency. But I do think that a righty bat specifically is probably something they will take a look at this offseason. As far as the lineup, I don't know. Like in a perfect world, absolutely. It's a preview. But I think that it's probably more likely that these are auditions and that they will keep around the players who hit well, and then they will fill in the gaps on the players who don't. The odds of like the lineup you saw Sunday being the opening day lineup in 2025 are probably slim to none. And I think that people would be frustrated if it was, because that would mean they didn't make a single addition in the offseason. But you have a lot of players who have potential to be in the lineup next season, which is why it's fun. Not all of them will. I think there's, again, close to a 0% chance that this is actually the lineup, but all of them have a chance to. The difference between those two things, I think, is important. From Drew, we have, do you think there will be a focus on right-handed hitters in the offseason for next year's draft? All the top prospects as well as current young players are lefties. I don't know. I think that Scott Harris kind of loves lefties. And I think that there might be, I don't know if that's I'm assuming it's a philosophy thing for him. So how do I word this? I don't think that he's necessarily going into everything going, we need only lefties. But I do think that he just is looking at pure ceiling. And I think that if two players are similar between righty and lefty, if they have similar ceilings, he's going to go with the lefty for right or wrong. So we will see what happens. But right now, the whole organization is littered with lefties. And that's why the Malloy send down was not surprising. But I mean, it leaves them shallow at right-handed hitter for the next, again, week and a half until Malloy is back in the majors. So certainly something to keep an eye out for. But I think Harris just really likes lefties. I have no guarantee that he's just going to go like, oh, well, we need a righty now because the last several drafts we've taken all lefties. I think he might just lean into it and just be like, I like lefties. So we'll see. But it's a great observation for sure. And then from Eric, we have, what is your best guess on the prospects the Tigers will send to the Arizona Fall League? This is always a great question and a great conversation to have. We'll obviously talk about the AFL a lot when the season ends. I think that there's a decent amount of players we could see in the AFL this year. I think that a guy like Eddie's Leonard could find himself there. I don't remember if he was there last year, but I feel like that's a guy that could find himself in that conversation. I also think that they have a lot of pitchers that they could potentially send there. I mean, obviously, like Clark and if McGonagall's healthy, maybe you want to get him some at bats. But if he's not healthy, then they'll obviously play it safe. So you have the top end guys. Lorenzo is another guy that obviously you just acquired that's been hitting really well that they could send over there. How Yu Lee is a guy that I would expect to. He might have been last year as well, but I think that that's somebody they maybe look at. But again, I think there's actually a decent amount of pitchers that could. Getting Ty Madden some more innings probably wouldn't hurt anybody. Joseph Montalvo, they acquired at the trade deadline this year, I think is a guy that it wouldn't shock me if he ended up going. Justice Bigby, I know went last year, but like didn't have a great year. Maybe that's somebody you send again. I'm not sure. Not too often do you see guys go multiple years in a row. I don't know. Like Roberto Campos has hit decently well this year. Maybe that's a guy that you want to get some more ABs this year. Eric Silva, another guy you acquired at the deadline, wouldn't shock me if he was somebody that they sent. I don't know, like Fran Gerber Montilla, I would love to see get some more ABs as well. A guy who has flown up prospect rankings this season, went from unranked to like top 15 on Pipeline just over the course of this season. There's a lot of names, and I think we'll have a little bit of that's a great question. I love, starting to talk about the AFL and whatnot. I think that we'll have a little bit of a clearer picture once the season ends. We'll get a health update on everybody in the organization. That will obviously determine a little bit of it. But then we'll also get, like just full season sample size, and we'll kind of see, okay, like, do they want to see more of this player? Do they want more innings for this pitcher? Stuff like that. So I think that those are all kind of on the table. I think they probably baby Job a little bit, and like not to give him a lot more innings. He might be a guy that they just play it safe on, and just this year is this year. But there's a pretty long list of guys. Those are kind of some of the guys. And then Jaden Ham is another one that I think would kind of make sense as well. But obviously, that's not 100% of the guys I just named are not all going to go to the AFL. It's probably only going to be a few of those. So again, once we get to the end of the season, we'll have a little bit of a clearer picture. How lucky are we that we get to be alive at the same time as the beautiful game of baseball? Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. Longer episode today. Had to get through as many questions as possible. We'll be back tomorrow. Okay, breaking down game 1 against the Cubbies. Have had a rough year. Some more opportunities for your Detroit Tigers. We'll talk about it all then. All right, peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you all then, baby. Go Tigers.